Looking now at our own project, Value Plus, which took place over a 2-year period and really explored patient involvement in a whole range of EU-funded health projects, public health, structural funds, information society, and indeed FP6 and FP7. What was interesting was, in terms of FP6 and FP7 projects, patient involvement was clearly weaker in research projects than in other projects, especially those focused on clinical trials, studies, or development of technologies and devices. It was also highlighted during the research that limited patient involvement took place at the inception and planning stage of projects, but also in the governance structure of projects. Yet it was clear from the interviews that took place and the studies and surveys that took place in the framework of Value Plus that project coordinators themselves had a clear interest in developing patient involvement. And the real challenge is how to translate this into practice, and also how to counter attitudes among certain associate partners that perhaps patient organisations are not credible or equal partners. The notion of educating patients and the general public about research concepts is also critical. I think this was touched upon also this morning. So the strengths of patient involvement. Clearly, when patients are engaged from the onset, they're more committed to applying research in real-life settings. And of course, a key strength, which is obvious to everybody here, is the integration of researchers' theory, expertise, with the patient's own real-world knowledge and experiences through living with a disease or a condition. And the challenge, I think, again, the real goal is to balance that scientific excellence, that strive towards innovation, with social and cultural relevance, which is what patient organisations are very much about. Let's look at some of the outcomes and deliverables, if you like, of our own project Value Plus, which may be of value and use to you. We produced a series of tools. First of all, the Value Plus toolkit, which is actually to enable patient organisations and patients to become more involved in EU-funded projects, including research projects, including IMI projects, some information, tips, good practice, and so on. A handbook, the Value Plus handbook, which is for project promoters and coordinators to enable them to get more skills, to enable them to work with patient organisations in an effective and productive way, really gleaning the specific expertise and knowledge of patients. And a series of policy recommendations looking at linking research project outcomes with patient-centred policy development. And we've also produced a comprehensive directory of patient organisations, potential partners in each of the EU member states. I'm just going to skip this slide because I think we have enough detail and it's, I think, in your notes already. And I'd go now to the last part of my presentation, which is a little bit of reflection in terms of patient involvement in IMI and moving forward. It's clearly of importance, but what also patient organisations can bring is the capacity to translate the outcomes of projects into the policy domain. Patient organisations are essentially advocacy organisations advocating policy change. So, for instance, in terms of the current debates on pharmacovigilance, EPF is in a very strong position to translate some of the outcomes of the work in research into this policy arena. Knowledge management, dissemination of the outcomes of projects to a much larger public, but in a more accessible and inclusive way. And I think the example that I talked about involving Alzheimer Europe actually is a good point to note. I think we also need to reflect collectively with regard to the power balance between the different partners involved in IMI projects: industry, academia, patient organisations and their representatives. Clearly, each of those partners have a hugely varying amount of resources to invest. I think this needs to be taken on board. The other thing I think is worth reflecting on is at what stage should patient groups be involved in projects? Should it be at the expression of interest stage, or once a consortium has been agreed and moved on to the next phase in terms of project application? Or should indeed it be a prerequisite that every single project should involve a patient organisation? Food for thought. In the third call, we believe that there's a real chance to move forward together in terms of promoting patient involvement, using powerful awareness-raising strategies, and hopefully using some of the tools I've described to you in my presentation. This is particularly relevant, I believe, in relation to the work on patient-reported outcomes, but also elsewhere and generally. I think it's really, really important to ensure the right role for patient organisations, really utilising their strengths and their expertise, particularly in highly technical and scientific projects where they're not necessarily going to be au fait with a lot of the vocabulary, a lot of the technical intricacies of a project, but really bring them in where it's of greatest value. We also believe in a climate where we're looking at the sustainability of health systems, we're looking at demographic changes and so on and so forth, that there's a need for more intersector collaboration, and IMI can really play a role there in terms of cooperation, collaboration between the pharmaceutical sector, the medical devices sector, and the information communication technology sector. This is a broad point, but I think it's important to reflect on this in the next couple of days as well. We'd also like to see a stronger e-health dimension in relation to IMI. This is hugely important, with potentially very, very strong benefits for patients. We've seen a little bit of that in the previous call in terms of knowledge management and electronic health records, but again, we see a scope to do perhaps a little more. We feel policy-wise, it's very important to actually link IMI with the outcomes of the Pharmaceutical Forum and indeed the post-Pharmaceutical Forum process and the current work around corporate responsibility in the task force being set up by DG Enterprise. And I think the previous speaker expounded the importance, the fundamental importance of linking IMI with developments within the European Medicines Agency and health technology assessment processes. Again, an obvious point, but something that I feel should be stressed during the discussions over the next couple of days. And the European Patients Forum is working very closely with both the European Medicines Agency and indeed developments and cooperation at European level on technology, health technology assessment. The global perspective is obvious, and again, from a patient's perspective, we would be very, very keen to encourage a global perspective to IMI to ensure as many patients as possible outside the European Union actually glean some of the advantages, some of the real outcomes of IMI as an initiative. Moving towards the end of my presentation, I'd also like to highlight perhaps the case for including as a criterion within the process evaluation of IMI, not looking specifically at innovation, but looking at patient involvement per se as a core indicator. Again, I leave that for you as food for thought. And then looking, way down the road into the future. I know that this current initiative lasts till 2017, but I think it's very important that we look ahead, that we're visionary, and we actually situate ourselves in terms of where we want to be with regard to IMI, what I term IMI2, and certainly the European Patients Forum is more than willing to play our role in that regard. I'll close now, but I would like to just highlight you're able to download the tools that I mentioned earlier from our website, and if you'd like any contact with myself personally or my team here in Brussels, then please don't hesitate to go to the website or send us an email, and I'll be around over the next few hours to talk to anybody who's particularly interested. Thank you very much for your attention.